Black women are having a moment. Yes, we are. From the Supreme Court to coins and even Barbie. Black women are in the spotlight and receiving long overdue and well deserved recognition and promotions to critical positions. Now, a lot of folks can't handle this. From Fox News hosts to prominent law professors, the critique has been fast and furious. Why are folks so threatened by Black women's shine? Experts weigh in. Coming up next.
Live from Los Angeles, this is the Special Report with Areva Martin.
Supreme Court Justice Stephen Breyer announced yesterday that after 28 years on the Supreme Court, he is going to retire at the end of this term in June. His retirement gives President Joe Biden an opportunity to make good on one of his key campaign promises to appoint the court's first African-American female Supreme Court justice. Already, 7 or 8 supremely qualified Black women, judges, law professors, and civil rights lawyers have emerged as potential nominees, including several of my Harvard Law School classmates and alums. Now, all of this comes on the heels of Maya Angelou being the first Black woman to be put on a U.S. coin and Mississippi journalist Ida B. Wells becoming the latest heroine to get her own signature Barbie. Black women seem to be having a moment, and as many in the country are celebrating, there are those who are openly complaining and speaking out, accusing Democrats of discrimination and even an obsession with race. Here for my leadoff discussion is New York Times bestselling author of Hood Feminism, Mikki Kendall. Mikki is returning to the Special Report, one of my favorite authors. So glad to sit down with you today, Mikki, in particular, because of all of this incredible news about a Black woman. First time ever in the almost 200-year history of this Supreme Court having the potential of having a Black woman on the court. I just want to ask you first, Mikki, what was your reaction when you learned that Justice Breyer was retiring and that this possibility was opening up?
So I'm going to say this, and this is not a knock on the announcement. This is about the fact that everyone acted like this was a surprise and somehow it's unfair. It's overdue for a Black woman to be on the Supreme Court. We are overdue for representation in the highest offices of the land. Like, the coins are nice, right? The talk about Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill, I mean, I guess. But the reality is that we are absolutely in a moment where instead of representation being a token image, we might actually have representation that approaches something that might be meaningful.
Yeah.
Right?
Overdue, I don't even know if that describes where we are, because you were thinking about, think about this court, Supreme Court established in 1789. And the first African-American on the court, Thurgood Marshall, didn't happen until 1967. That was 178 years after the establishment of the court. It just kind of blows your mind when you put it in that context about how long it has taken for us to get to this moment. Yet everybody's not celebrating, Mikki.
Racism is gonna racism. Misogyny is gonna misogyny. I think one of the things about everyone's lack of celebration, and I know it's not actually everyone, but the people who are scared, they have their own ideas of what they would do with power. And they're afraid that someone else with power might do what they would do. And that is their problem to sort out. But honestly, given the way the court has trended, given what has happened over the last few years of appointments, we are currently in a situation where women's rights to choose, to be protected in the workplace, to exist as fully equal, autonomous members of society are at risk. A Black woman on the court is just one step of many that need to be happening right now.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That 178 years that it took to get Thurgood Marshall, it was 192 years later that we got Sandra Day OConnor. And, Republicans who are complaining about Biden's campaign promise and the fact that he's going to, live up to that promise have such short memories. They forget that it was Ronald Reagan in 1980 who was trying to win over women's voters because he had opposed the Equal Rights Amendment, that it was Ronald Reagan, who promised to appoint a woman to the court. And in 1981, he made good on that promise and appointed Sandra Day OConnor to the court, making, again, history, the first woman to be appointed to the Supreme Court. So those Republicans, Ronald Reagan did it, and it was, of course, okay for him to make a promise and then, keep that promise. But somehow Joe Biden making that promise, on that presidential debate stage, doing it and now saying without equivocation, yes, I'm going to live up to that promise. Somehow, it's cause for them to complain. And I know it's easy to dismiss them, the naysayers and complainers, but do you think we need to give more credence? I mean, because some of the naysayers are saying things such as that this is a form of discrimination. Yes, I know it's hard to believe, but yes, there are otherwise reputable people saying that this somehow represents discrimination.
So I'm going to say this. They had no concerns about discrimination when all of the appointees were white men. They had no concerns about discrimination when the court, as it has been at several points, contained absolutely no one darker than a paper bag. They were not concerned. They are not concerned about the current political imbalance on the court, where there are only 3 liberal justices in a court that is theoretically supposed to reflect the nation, which would be a lot closer to a 50-50 split. But what they are concerned about is that Biden's picks might be an obstacle to the currently stated plan to cut off women's rights,
right? To
make sure that people who have uteruses do not get to choose what happens to their bodies. Yeah. And if you are anti-equality, then yes, you are very nervous and you're going to grab every argument from the bottom of the barrel, from the trees, from the wind, in hopes that someone will listen to you. Yeah. But factually, functionally, Black people make up 13% on average, between 13 and 15% of America's population. If the court were a statistical representation of America, there would be both a Black man and a Black woman on the court. There would be someone who is Latina. There would be a lot of people. There would be a lot fewer white people on the court. So if we're worried about discrimination, we could make the court less white right now.
Yeah, and I'm glad you brought that up, because the reality is 95% of the people that have been appointed to the Supreme Court have been white men, 95%. And African-American women, you're right, we make up 13 to 15% of the population, but African-American women are only 2% of all lawyers in this country. So a very small percentage of the lawyers in this country are Black women to begin with. And Black women judges have had a really difficult time. I mean, when you look at the history, it took almost 80 years of appointments before we started to see Black women being appointed to the courts. And we know that the first Black woman appointed to a federal court was, Constance Baker Motley, and she appeared on many short lists for the Supreme Court. Her name frequently came up, but, never, was she appointed, and history, will always credit her as being the first Black woman judge on a federal court, but never made it to an appointment. Let's talk some, Mikki, though, about who is appointed. There's a list of about 7 or 8 Black women, all superbly qualified. We're talking, Brown Jackson, Judge Brown Jackson, just appointed to the D.C. Court of Appeals with 3 Republican votes, Harvard undergrad, Harvard Law School. We're talking about a California Supreme Court judge. Obviously Sherrilyn Ifill's on this list. She is, renowned civil rights lawyer. They're federal judges. So you can't get more credentialed than the women on this list. Just can't happen. But, we're not a monolith. And so the voice of this Black woman, let's talk about how that person's voice might change, because we're not going to change the makeup of the court. Still going to be 6 conservative judges, 3 liberal judges. This judge will replace Breyers, so it will be a third. It's just, trading out one for another one. But I think there's something more significant than that that's happening. And from your perspective, who writes about feminism, writes about women, what do you hope to see from the voice of a Black woman on the court?
I hope to see a Black woman advocating for actual equity. I hope to see rulings that reflect the fact that we are more than 60 years, theoretically, post the end of Jim Crow being legalized in the United States, and that we could perhaps make rulings that aren't based on Jim Crow era logic, that aren't based on white supremacy. Do I think that this will be a magical overnight change in the direction of the country or of the court? Absolutely not. But I think that we are looking at a situation where, even though people are saying, well, this is discrimination, you haven't named a single candidate more qualified than the 7 names that we've heard for this. No one has better credentials, better experience. We are literally looking at a field which, relatively speaking, is full of options, right? If it wasn't just Breyer, if it was Breyer and 1 or 2 others leaving, this would still be a great field to choose from. Right. You would still be looking at highly qualified, highly relevant to the current and future era of America options. And I know that justices are supposed to be impartial, but we've all recognized that that is not necessarily what's happening. But I would hope to see someone whose impartiality reflects the reality that women are people. Women are human beings with rights and equals, and that for people who do not identify as women or who are trans or genderqueer, they are human. We are all human, and all of our rights should be protected. Other people don't have to like your rights for your rights to be protected.
And Justice Breyer, you're right. Judges are supposed to be impartial. They're supposed to be, deciding the law based on the Constitution, based on legal precedent. But we know that a justice like Justice Breyer, he was a staunch supporter of social justice, civil rights. He reaffirmed the Roe case. He reaffirmed Casey. He did a lot to speak to kids, high school kids, school kids, about civics, about the importance of being civically engaged. So he brought a great deal of balance to a court that over his tenure was becoming increasingly more and more conservative. But we have seen Mikki, a Black person, in the person of Justice Clarence Thomas, be appointed to the court. And we knew at the time that he was appointed that he was conservative. But do you think we could have ever expected Justice Thomas to go as far to the right as we've seen him evolve over the years that he's been on the court? Does it surprise you when you read some of his dissenting opinions and just, see some of the things that he says as a sitting judge, as a sitting Black man judge? Let's not leave that out.
I'm going to say this as gently as I can. I never thought he should have been on the court. I never thought that someone whose history of sexual harassment opened the door for someone like Kavanaugh to also be on the court. So I am not surprised, because every time Clarence Thomas's wife, Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, opens her mouth, we get a peek into what's going on inside that house. Mm-hmm. And while I think that it is unusual that he is still holding a seat while she is barreling towards a political agenda, which I don't think we've seen reflected in the spouses of other other justices on the court. Mm-hmm. I am not as surprised as I suppose I could be, because someone who could do the things that he was alleged to do, and someone who could behave the way that he behaved and then stand there and say that he was being lynched for being questioned, had already divorced himself from the concepts of equality and civil rights that he had benefited from.
Yeah, you mentioned Clarence Thomas's wife. There are some recent articles about her activism, her participation even with groups who have cases before the Supreme Court, raising all kinds of conflicts of interest, issues about how Clarence Thomas is even sitting on cases, involving issues that his wife is so actively involved in, either raising money or somehow, just providing consulting services, or, actively engaging in this very, very pro right-wing agenda that she's been, fiercely a part of. But I do want to ask you, what do you think the dynamics will be between Clarence Thomas, African-American man, and whichever one of these superbly qualified Black women are going to end up? Because it's going to happen. The Democrats can't get everything done that they've wanted to get done. But thanks to Mitch McConnell, who changed the filibuster rules, so all you need is 51 votes in the Senate, We have 50 votes with Democrats. We got 51 with Vice President Harris, and we probably have 2 or 3 Republicans that will pick up, with one of these nominees. But what do you think about that dynamic? Like, what do you imagine that, those meetings will look like when you have what probably is going to be a liberal, at least a moderate Democrat, in the form of this new justice, and then sitting there with Clarence Thomas?
I suspect he will rediscover the silence that he is hidden in at other points when having to interact with strong Black women. I suspect that they will be cordial because we are all professionals in this moment, but we will perhaps keep ourselves to ourselves, as my granny used to say, because there are things and behaviors that we have previously engaged in that I don't think it's a good look to attempt to engage in now. Just going to put it that way. I think he's going to find his lane and try to stick to it carefully.
Yeah, that's going to be interesting. You're right. I'm sure all these Black women, judges and lawyers are going to be incredibly professional and civil at all times. But we have a way, right? We have a way. I can just imagine that it's going to be a new day in that court. There's going to be a new energy. It's going to be a new vibe. And even with, somebody like Amy Coney Barrett, I think that's going to be an interesting dynamic too, particularly if one of the justices that gets appointed has children, because we've heard Amy Coney Barrett, make references to her Black children and try to, establish herself as a certain kind of maternal figure of the court. So it'll be interesting to see one of these women with children and what that dynamic is like with our new Justice Barrett.
I think a cold wind will blow often in that building. I'll put it that way.
All right, we got to leave it there. Thank you so much, Mikki. Always a pleasure to sit down with you. Again, author of the New York Times bestselling book, Hood Feminism. Make sure you pick it up if you haven't already done so. It's already sold tons and tons of copies, but it's one book you don't want to miss. Always a pleasure to see you, my friend.
Thank you.
All right, my next guest is Dr. Nadia Brown. She's a professor of women's studies at Georgetown University and the author of several award-winning books, including her most recent book, Sister Style. Good morning and welcome, Dr. Brown.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
Absolutely. What were your thoughts? I'm just curious as to, what reaction did you have when you learned that it may be a reality that we will be getting the first Black woman on the Supreme Court?
It's about time. My reaction was, this has been a long time coming, and I'm glad that the Biden administration is upholding its promises. And I'm also just really excited for our vice president, the first Black woman vice president, to cast that deciding vote. As you noted, right? It's a 50-50 Senate that just needs to confirm this. And I'm thinking of all the imagery of having a Black woman cast that deciding vote to confirm the first Black woman Supreme Court justice.
Yeah, I don't know, Dr. Brown. She may not have to do it, because what we saw with the appointment of Judge Brown Jackson to that D.C. Court of Appeals, she actually picked up 3 Republican votes. I mean, this is kind of low-hanging fruit for those Republicans who are, hell-bent on obstructing Biden's agenda. But when it comes to these judges, when you have a double Harvard, or you have a Harvard Yale, or you have a Georgetown, or you have the credentials that so many of these judges have, it's kind of ridiculous, right?
Oh, of course.
Vote in favor of them.
Of course. But that doesn't stop this, right? So we know that this Republican Party is lockstep behind President Trump, right? And so things that worked a couple of months ago won't play out the same way. And as you noted, right, that these are incredibly qualified nominees. Whoever Biden decides to put their name forward is someone who is well-deserving to be on the Supreme Court. But that doesn't mean that the politics moves outside of this, right? And that the Republicans are not going to, I think, uniformly stand behind an obstructionist view. So I'm even thinking about white women Republicans who want to see more gender diversity, right? Who really are thinking about ways that women have been underrepresented, but will probably have a hard time selling to their constituents in 2022 that you should reelect me because I also supported a Biden nominee, right? So if you have a Congress that is trying to do all that they can in order to stymie the president, having a win under their hat to say that we are not going to vote for his nominee is something that these Republicans can take back to their constituents when they're looking for re-election in 2022.
Yeah, you're right. Biden asked in that press conference last week, what do you stand for? We know what you stand against, and you stand against anything and everything that he tries to do. So, yes, we will definitely see some votes, and probably a majority of Republicans voting against whoever the nominee is. I do want to ask you, though, about this kind of moment that I feel like Black women are having. Mikki mentioned the coin and Maya Angelou on the coin. Some people see that as just symbolism. What do you make of that? How should we think about this? Because it's historic, it's important, it's significant. There are a lot of folks that I saw on Twitter who were, bashing it, saying, we don't need to be on a coin. Give us, real equality. Give us reparations. Give us what we deserve. This is just tokenism. Do you think that's the right way to think about this?
I don't think we have to think about things in binaries. Life is messy. There's gray. It's complications. And so this is one of them. So we definitely should applaud the representation of Black women like Maya Angelou, and all of her accomplishments are represented on this coin, right? It is something for little Black children to look down and see an image that reflects in them, right? And then also for Black women to remember that we are phenomenal. So yes, money, and it's also, this is a capitalistic enterprise. So putting Maya Angelou's face on, an American currency is fraught. And there are real issues that need to change, right? Black women's mortality is still sky high, right? Black women as essential workers are put on the forefront of catching COVID and passing it on to our families, right? So there are real substantive things that need to happen, but it doesn't stop us from seeing the joy of having ourselves represented in this way.
Yeah, and the other bill Mikki mentioned was Harriet Tubman. There was an effort to have her placed on the $20 bill. It kind of stalled under Trump. We're not sure where it's going to go under the Biden administration. But also similar kind of backlash about, as you said, that tension between having a Black woman, particularly Harriet Tubman. Now we'll have a former slave who's on this U.S. currency and all that currency and the capitalistic system that we live in represent. How should we be thinking about that Harriet Tubman and, potential of her on the $20 bill?
Yeah, so the Treasury Department says that this will still happen sometimes closer to 2030 or 2035. So it's still on the table, although, as you noted, that far, yes. And so don't get dismayed, but this is doing of the Trump administration, as you noted, right? So this is pushing this out to do more studies and to figure out, how this is going to look and being rolled out in production. But this is a real contradiction, right? So Black Americans in particular, love the country and have put their heart, sweat, blood, and tears into building this nation, and have very concrete kind of criticisms of capitalism and how the American capitalistic society that is based on white heteropatriarchy has hurt Black women in particular, right? So I think that we can't divorce the two. The question for me is, would Ida B. Wells want to be placed on a coin? Would Harriet Tubman want to be placed on a coin? Would Maya Angelou want to be placed on a coin? In some ways, we're doing this revisionist history, right? We just celebrated King Holiday, and we know that there's been this whitewashing of how we're thinking about civil rights leaders, people that have pushed for abolition and Black freedom and liberation. And putting them on a coin might be a way that makes us symbolically feel good, but it's also sanitizing who they are, what they fought for. So I think it's up to us as educators, as community leaders, as people that are engaged, to tell both sides of the story. So yes, we can look at these pictures, these representations, and say, we've come a long way, but there's so much more to go. And we have to remember the spirit of these people whose images are represented in these ways.
That's interesting. So are you suggesting that Ida B. Wells or Harriet Tubman and maybe even Maya Angelou would not want to be represented on, currency because of what it represents in terms of, America's relationship with capitalism, Black America's relationship with capitalism?
I don't think so. I think that would be.
Well, I mean, you don't think that they would want to be on?
Right. I don't think that they would want to be, right? I think that there is a recognition of what our money symbolizes, not just here in the United States, but it's also an imperial project, right? That we know that much of the world's currency is backed by the US dollar, and what the United States have done to people of color throughout the world, particularly in the global South, not just here, right? So if these are freedom fighters here in America, they've also raised their voices to injustices that have done across the world. So it's a much bigger picture than just saying, yay, this feels good to look down in my pocket and see a quarter that looks like me, and my girls, my children can see themselves and learn about Maya Angelou, but to think more holistically, right? Not just about what this means for us here, but what this means for the global project.
Okay, well, if you take that view, which I think is, obviously a well-informed, well-educated view, to have, should they not do it? I don't know if it's up to Maya Angelou's descendants or family or, whomever to make that decision, but, should there be a resistance to having Black figures like these women who were civil rights leaders or freedom fighters on coin? Should there be outright resistance to it?
No, I think that's an excellent question, because we have to remember that these people have living descendants that we could actually talk to and ask. So it's not for me, right, a political science professor, director of women's studies, to give my opinion, right? But you could actually go and talk to these family members that have a vested interest of putting forth a legacy that they want Americans and the world to remember their family members by. I have an opinion, certainly, right? But it's one thing when we can talk to their ancestors. So like we know in Chicago, Ida B. Wells' descendants have been really vocal in getting her name on street signs, right, and naming a street after her, that the city of Chicago has been in conversation with her family. Why not do this for the Barbie, right? Why not do this for other things that we want to use their image on? We saw again last week celebrating the King holiday, Bernice King talking really forcefully on Twitter about the way that her father's image has been used, how people are cherry picking quotes that they want to, particularly Kristen Sinema, right? Cherry picking quotes that they want to use about her father to celebrate his legacy, but then doing the exact opposite in their actions, right? So it's not so far flung to say, we're picking up people that have been dead and buried for 400 years, right? Maya Angelou died in our lifetime, right, 3 years ago. So there are ways that I think we should be engaging a larger population, but particularly a meaningful population, and not just thinking about what the regular old Black Americans think. But if this were your mother, if this was your auntie, if this was your cousin, how would you want their legacy to be remembered? And it might not be through a capitalistic project.
No, very good point. And I don't know, and maybe if the family members of either of these women we're talking about now, Maya Angelou or Ida B. Wells, were consulted. Do you know that? I don't know.
I do not. I have not seen that reported in any news outlets.
Okay. Well, I'm going to ask my producers to try to find out, because now I'm curious. I do want to know. You're right. Maya Angelou's family members, are alive and around. Ida B. Wells, obviously, as you said, have family members who've been involved in trying to advocate for her to have more presence in the Chicago area. Let's talk about Ida, though, and this Barbie doll. Ida B. Wells is not a name that many people will even know or recognize. I mean, she was an incredible fighter, anti-lynching, anti-discrimination fighter, in her period, journalist, incredible journalist. But why do you think she hasn't gotten the same level of attention that so many others, like a Harriet Tubman, have received?
I love Ida B. Wells, and I love her story. Think about the work that historian Paula Giddens has done into writing her biography. But I think it's because Ida B. Wells pulled no punches, right? She called it like it was. She said the harsh things. She was not afraid to tell people what she thought, and then use her influence and power to go about her business and not stay involved, and particularly Black men's messiness, right? She called out white women. She did all of the things that, that I think here and today on a social media platform, she'd have all the followers, right? My students would be wanting to talk to her and would be following her on social media. And she backed it up with receipts, right? Because she had this newspaper that she published, that she wrote copious amounts of letters to people explaining her grievances. So Ida B. Wells for me was that person, right? She was that woman that that's not my personality, but I would like to have been around it, right? I would have liked to hear her just be a sure truth teller. And so I think that's why she's been buried, because her story isn't as neat and easy, right? So if we're holding up particularly Black men luminaries, and so no one wants to talk about how she went after W.E.B. Du Bois, right? No one wants to talk about how she went after Elizabeth Cady Stanton and Anthony B.C.
So tell us that story. How did she go after Du Bois? What was her critique?
Yeah, so when through the Niagara movement, when the NAACP was trying to get off the ground, or the pre-meetings to what we now know as the NAACP, they had some falling outs, right? They had different agreements on what this organization should look like. Should it be interracial? What are the role of women? And Ida B. Wells did not agree with the prescription that W.E.B. Du Bois put forth. As we know, W.E.B. Du Bois goes on to lead the NAACP and kind of form this. And rather than being part of something that she disagreed with the original conceptualization, Ida B. Wells just said, I'm out, right? And she just walked away. And she's done the same things when, again, with the suffrage movement, when white suffragists who were pushing racist tropes decided that Black women did not have a place in the suffrage movement and that we should work on universal white women's suffrage, right? Mm-hmm. Not Black women. And what Ida B. Wells did was call them out and say, this is racist, right? There should be universal suffrage. And when there was the 1913 suffrage march, Ida B. Wells was told to march in the back with the other Black women. And what she said was, no, I'm not going to do this. I'm going to march in my Illinois delegation with the Alfred Suffrage Club that I founded, and you will deal, right? And so she was very confrontational. She didn't, she didn't just shy away. She wasn't in the typical women's place in the day or a Black woman's place in the day, right? She believed in her full agency and humanity and called others to the carpet.
So you said her family has been vocal in the Chicago area of getting streets named after her and having her more recognized. So what is your take on this Barbie? Is that something that would be, because Barbie has its own
yes,
baggage. We can talk about Barbie. That's a whole nother show, right? So yes. There are lots of folks praising it. Now little girls will get to have a Black Barbie that's not just a booby perfect model Barbie, but a Barbie of someone like Ida B. Wells, who stood for so much and, who was so substantive in terms of her work, her advocacy. But,
right.
What are you thinking now about Barbie? Because Barbie's not necessarily the perfect representation for a woman like Ida B. Wells.
Right. And then you're exactly, so I'm also having these internal struggles, right? Because I'm the mother of 3 young children. I have 3 girls, and ordinarily I would have thought this would be great for them to have. I have a colleague, Aria Holiday at the University of Kentucky, who's doing this great work. She has a new book coming out, By Black, where she talks about Black women's imagery and looking at things like Mattel and Barbie. So I encourage everyone to go check out Aria Holiday's new book, By Black. But also thinking about, what does it mean for our children to play with an historical figure that is taking out of kind of historical context? And can parents talk with their children about who Ida B. Wells was?
Well, let's stop there, because most parents don't know themselves who Ida B. Wells.
And why are you buying the Barbie?
You're
right?
in Georgetown. You're at this prestigious university. The average person who's walking down the aisle in Target or Walmart who sees a Black Barbie is just thinking, Black Barbie. We're just so excited, right, that there is a Black Barbie to begin with. I don't know, and I'm not saying that mothers are dumb or anything, but it's just, the reality of raising.
Right, we're not taught her, right?
Yeah, we're not taught,
we weren't taught about her.
Well, you've got to be like an insider. You've got to be, in a certain circle to even know her. She's not, let's face it. You learn 2 people in Black history, Dr. King and Rosa Parks, right?
Right.
So once you get past Dr. King and Rosa Parks, you're talking about, college professors like yourself who know Ida B. Wells. So how can parents give that perspective if, that's not something that they are?
No, I mean, and you're exactly right. And a person like Ida B. Wells, right, to divorce her and what she stands for, right? So she comes to national prominence through her newspaper in Tennessee, where she's calling out lynchings, right? And she's saying to white Tennesseans, y'all are saying that you are, upholding white dignity, and that actually, like, the lynchings happened of her friends, and she's saying business owners, and she's saying you attacked these businesses. And you did that intentionally. It wasn't because of rape. It wasn't this trumped up charge that these men raped a white woman. It's actually that you're trying to keep Black business down and Black's mobility and agency down. Right? So just starting off from the bang, right, learning about Ida B. Wells brings parents into a very uncomfortable conversation. And then you're right. I'm not sure many people are prepared, willing, or ready to have that, and thinking about the right ways to bring up conversations of lynching to their children. But this is all encompassed in this Barbie doll. I'm not sure what Mattel is thinking, how they're planning to, how they're going to roll out, right, the more softer side of Ida B. Wells. But there really is a limited softer side.
I was going to say, because Ida's a pistol. I think Dr. Lindsay's here. Let's bring her into the conversation. Dr. Treva Lindsay, she's a professor of African American women's history at Ohio State University, and I know you all are colleagues and friends. She's a returning guest to the special report. Good morning, Dr. Lindsay. How are you? I think you're on mute.
Good morning. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Okay, so we're like in the thick of this conversation about Ida B. Wells, Barbie, and Mattel, and we're trying to make sense of this, because I'm saying, look, if you're a parent, you're going down the aisle of a Target, Walmart, you're just happy to see a black Barbie, and Professor Brown is like, wait a minute, you got to talk about the history of Ida B. Wells, and many of us don't know that, or some of us know it, some of us know a little about it, but not very much. Yes. What are you thinking about Barbie and Ida B. Wells?
So while I appreciate, and I got to come in at the tail end of Dr. Brown's wonderful comments here, of thinking about what it means to have this representational moment. And I think it's significant for a lot of people. There's an opportunity for parents to learn about the history of lynching, the history of race, especially in a moment in which our schools are being told not to tell these difficult histories, to not talk about these difficult histories, to not have these challenging dialogues that talk about this inglorious history that Ida B. Wells herself was documenting in real time, that we now look to as a historical record to make the connections between lynching and rape and racism, white supremacy, Jim Crow, patriarchy, and can make connections to 2022 with that. But that requires a certain kind of knowledge in order for that doll not to just be a doll that's a Black doll, and now I have a Black doll. It's like, no, you have a freedom fighter. Right. You have someone who pushed against the grain. So if Mattel is committing to, and I know there are folks involved with this, including the great granddaughter of Ida B. Wells, who was a consultant of this, with materials alongside that, something on their website to really provide an opportunity for both parents and children and caretakers and communities to learn about Ida B. Wells, Barnett. I'm excited for that opportunity. As an educator, I'm always excited about what culture offers us as an opportunity. But we can absolutely misuse that opportunity and use this as a sign of progress we have yet to make.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And, we were having a conversation before you joined about tokenism. And is it that to have the Barbie, to have the coin, Maya Angelou on the coin? And how do we make it other than that? How do we make it represents something that's beautiful and gives us this teaching moment, this educational moment? Dr. Brown, so, Dr. Lindsay says that the granddaughter or children, great children or grandchildren of Ida B. Wells are involved in this project. Have you seen any of the material that Mattel is giving out with the doll, or what's on their website? Have you had a chance to look at any of that? And is it hitting the mark?
I have not. And full disclaimer, right? I am not a supporter of Barbie. So this would be for me a real look, right? Because I'd have to decide, again, like as a parent, is this something that I want to give my girls? I've intentionally stayed away from giving them Barbies. So I am interested as a parent to see. As an educator, I have a different lens towards this, right? I'm more leaning towards my colleague and good friend, Treva Lindsay, on this, right? I think this is always an opportunity for me to bring into my classroom. But as a parent, am I ready to share this with my young children? I still need to do some more research.
Do you know, Dr. Lindsay, have you seen the material? Do that comes with the Barbie?
Yes. So I looked at, so Mattel does have some kind of why they chose particular figures for this and some information that gives a little insight into that. Is it as in-depth as I would like it, or even I think the descendants of Ida B. Wells would like? No. Again, I'm always trying to think about opportunity here, as my colleague Dr. Brown and friend said, of opportunity and possibility, and what it opens up space for, and also what it can foreclose. I'm someone who also didn't grow up with Barbies as an ideal. And I understand that Mattel is making this turn towards not just inclusivity, but actually grappling with what it means to represent women who were change makers, who were dynamic and forces in the world. And I think that's a change I'm looking towards and I'm interested in. I'm not yet convinced either that that is what we do. But if it gives me as an opportunity as a godparent, as a teacher, as an educator to say, this is Ida B. Wells, this is why she's important, that means something to me. And if I know that I'm working with children who do engage dolls, right, across genders, across spectrum, then having a Ida B. Wells doll might be an interesting opportunity for doing that kind of work. And so there is a little bit of material and there is a little bit of information of why they chose the dolls that they chose and who they chose to represent. And I think there are some people involved in this process who are not only well-meaning, but attempting to think about the educational possibilities of this. And I think there's a commodity aspect of this. And I think as Black people with a history of literally being commodities as enslaved people, there's always this tug and pull about what it means to be represented, and particularly what it means to enter into material culture as an object. Yeah. When you're a people that's been objectified, when you're a people that's been enslaved and commodified, what it means to then open yourself up to commodity and symbolism to a country that still hasn't reckoned with its history and the repercussions and afterlives of that objectification and commodification. A doll or a coin become almost these pacifying elements that don't force us and compel us to dig in.
Yeah, and I want to know both of your thoughts in this moment, because now we're talking about the first Black woman on the Supreme Court, something that, is long overdue. We've all said, should have happened, 192 years ago, just happening now. In the context, though, of this push, as you said, by Mattel to tell the story of this freedom fighter, to maybe make a turn with respect to what Barbie is or what Barbie represents, the U.S. Treasury Department with respect to coins and even currency with Harriet Tubman on the $20 bill. Are Black women have this moment that we should have been having, or is this just kind of fleeting? Do you think this is, I like to ask the question of movement versus moment. Do you think this is a real movement that we're experiencing? I know, Dr. Brown, you've got to leave, so I'll give you the opportunity to answer first.
So I think that this is a moment that Black women have worked very hard for as part of a movement, right? So I don't think we can divorce the two. So what we're seeing now is decades worth of activism of Black women to move the federal government and state and local governments to be more responsive to Black women's issues and needs, getting them elected, supporting them as candidates, and changing policy, right? Or attempting to change policy and craft our own. In terms of representation, like Treva said, we've always been commodified. If it wasn't this, I'm not sure what it would be. So having a freedom fighter on a coin and as a Barbie is a new moment for us, but our bodies have always been used to sell things, to propagate American imperialistic, capitalistic projects that, again, still center and uphold white heteropatriarchy. So that part isn't new. But what feels new in this moment is that those that have been pushing this movement forward are getting their due recognition, right? So now we call out the names like LaTosha Brown, we call out Stacey Abrams, right? We talk about the ways that activists have been pushing Black women judges to come to the forefront, to say that these people are just as qualified and capable as being in the federal judiciary as anybody else, right? And so we spent a lot of time looking one way, and now I think this political moment has us looking in multiple directions and seeing this not just as a top-down driven process, but the ways that Black women are pushing, right, are literally pushing to have more representation in ways that they want, not necessarily things that just are given to us, right? But how can Black women set the table for themselves so that we can eat?
No, very well said. Thank you so much, Dr. Brown. A pleasure to sit down with you. Thank you for your insights. I know you've got to leave. I definitely want to have you back, continue this conversation. Let me know if you decide to buy that Barbie for your 3 girls.
I will. I will. Thank you for having me.
No, absolutely. All right. Dr. Lindsay, I just want to get your thoughts on it. What are we to make of this moment? You know, Black women possibly headed to definitely headed to the United States Supreme Court. Promise made by Biden, promise that his team says he intends to absolutely positively keep. What are you thinking about this in this moment?
Yes, I echo my colleague, Dr. Brown's sentiments here that, as you said, it's a moment that's made possible by a movement. And part of that moment for me, and I echo Representative Cori Bush's sentiments here, is that this Black woman be one who's bringing her experiences as a Black woman, as someone who's thinking through the legal ramifications that the Supreme Court can usher down that can deeply impact the lives of Black women and girls in significant ways, that this is someone who's going to be thinking about that. Right? This is not just any Black woman. This is a Black woman that's in the tradition of Black women pushing the federal government, pushing us forward toward a more inclusive nation project. And I think that that's very important to keep in mind here. Whereas I'm very excited about this possibility, if this possibility is actually reckoning with the need for someone whose legal mind and legal expertise really brings us closer to an idea that Black women have been fighting for since we got here, right? We've always been pushing for a more perfect union. Some of us have been pushing against the existence of the nation state. There are many schools of thought, but I want to honor that incredible tradition that says that we've never had a democracy in this nation, and that Black women have been at the center of those who've been unjustly treated along racism, sexism, classism, and various other forms of oppression. And so how do we redress that in the legal system as it exists? How do we set legal precedent that does that? And I'm interested in a Black women justice who's going to bring us closer to that vision that's in that incredible tradition of Black women pushing for that kind of more perfected union.
Well, we've seen some backlash, you know, some of it expected, right? Fox News hosts, Republicans, elected officials saying that Democrats make everything about race, that this is another way that we are dividing, or Biden is dividing the country. But what do you make of, I've seen some white women applaud this, you know, historic moment, but I haven't seen, you know, and I don't profess to have watched everything on television, but, you know, I'm a news junkie, so I watch a whole lot of news, a whole lot of people on social media. I'm not seeing this groundswell of outpouring from white women around this. What do you make of that? And maybe you are, so correct me if I'm wrong, but I'm not seeing it in a way that I would think you would see it. You know, the Republicans I expected the Fox folks, you know, to be fast and furious with their complaints and their objections. But I kind of thought we'd see more white women coming out saying, this is amazing, this is awesome, this is the moment for all women, and let's get behind this.
So I haven't seen it either, to be perfectly honest with you. I think that what is troubling about that is that that also fits into a long tradition. And we have to think about the ways, and particularly white liberal feminists and white women more largely are not thinking through the lens of a Black women-centered, Black feminist-centered, Latino women-centered. We didn't see this around Justice Sotomayor either, that you saw this incredible groundswell of support and push that you think you would see because these individuals are deeply wedded to protecting the rights that are afforded people through whether that's reproductive justice, whether that's civil rights, education, voting rights, et cetera, that we see justices who are committed to that. And we just haven't seen that. And so we have to be very honest and candid about the ways that a number of white women still very much so have this kind of race-based vision of the world and think it's race neutral, because they're not saying it loudly. They're not identifying themselves as white supremacists or white nationalists. But in fact, by de-racializing this conversation, they're evacuating the very real and living history of racism that has impacted our entire legal system since its inception. And that is mirrored in the fact that we've never had a Black woman on the highest court in the land.
Yeah. All right, we've got to leave it there. Thank you. Always a pleasure to sit down with you. Yes. Keep doing the great work you're doing. Look forward to having you back, once we figure out who this phenomenal Black woman is going to be, because then we get to dive into her history and figure out, what that voice might represent, because we know we're not a monolith, right? And we're going to have lots of different voices, and those 7 or 8 women on that short list all, bring their own lived experiences to their jobs as judges, and definitely to the Supreme Court once one of them is appointed. So I'd love to have you back once we figure out who that nominee is going to be.
Always.
Thank you, Dr. Lindsay. All right, my next guest is Tamika Middleton. She's a community organizer and director of the Women's March. So we're talking about how this Supreme Court nominee might galvanize Democrats. Tamika, always a pleasure to see you, and thank you for joining me. I'll start off asking you the same question. What were your thoughts when you learned that this might be the moment when we're going to get a Black woman on the Supreme Court?
Absolutely. I think my first thought was a level of kind of excitement that I think so many of us are holding, that it is again, as the earlier guests were saying, it is long overdue. It is past time for us to be in that space. And I think my second thought was, and I am holding and hoping that that nominee is also a Black woman who represents the values that we need to have in order to meet the moment that we're in, because we recognize that the stakes are just so high right now, especially in the Supreme Court in this moment. We know that the stakes are so high, and we need a justice who is prepared to go to bat for the law, and also for the rights of those folks who are most marginalized in this country.
So, we're heading into the midterms. Biden's approval numbers are low. There's, lots of dissension even amongst Democrats. If you read Twitter, you think we're like in, a big family fight. Others say, no, we're not so divided, we're okay. But in any event, we know historically the person in the White House's party usually does poorly in the midterms. But how do you think this appointment, the appointment of a Black woman, could be used by community organizers like yourself to really galvanize voters to make sure we have record turnout in these midterms to try to stave off what might be a bloodbath if we don't turn out in big numbers?
I think we have to talk about what's at stake. I think we have to talk about what's at stake and the ways in which the appointment impacts that. I think if we're talking about the issues that matter to Black communities, the issues that matter to marginalized communities, then we can recognize that this appointment and that what we need to center actually are the issues that matter to Black women. We know that access to not just abortion care, but to reproductive health care broadly is at stake, is at risk in the Supreme Court right now. We know that paid parental leave is at stake. We know that the child tax credit is at stake. And so if we're talking about the appointment inside of this broader context of what matters to Black women, what matters to communities of color, and what we need to do, what we need to be advocating for in order to get those things done and to make sure that we don't lose voting rights. We know voting rights is at stake in this moment. Yesterday was the 2-year anniversary of the ratification of the Equal Rights Amendment in Virginia, and that still has not, and it's still being held up. And so we know there are all these pieces that are really important to women and to Black women in particular. And so if we are centering those issues and talking about this appointment inside of that broader context, then I think we can really mobilize people to the polls to fight for not just a party and not just a candidate, but for the things that we need in our communities in order to have the resources, the equality, and the rights that our folks need to survive and to thrive in this country.
What's next for the Women's March? Will there be another march this year? And if so, when? And what are the issues that will be on the table?
I think what we're looking for, what we're looking toward this year is we're in coalition as we were in October of last year around the Supreme Court and as it relates to abortion access. And so we know that we'll be getting a ruling on the Jackson's Women's Health Organization Supreme Court case in the summer. And so we're looking towards that in coalition with a number of other organizations. And so, there'll likely be some mobilization around that. And we'll definitely be working and mobilizing and fighting around the midterm elections. We know that there are some really specific places where we have to fight, where we have to be engaged in battles. We have to be talking about not what beyond representation means in elections. So, for instance, electing a Kristen Sinema who then blocks so much progress. What does it mean for us to not just elect women, but to elect women who hold our values? And so those are the things we'll really be looking towards, and how we can build a platform, build a movement, continue to educate folks around what we need to do to advance a feminist future in this country.
Well, thank you so much, Tamika. Thank you for all the work that you're doing. We'll be watching what the Women's March does. We'll be watching, who that nominee is. We'll probably know in the next couple of weeks, if not sooner. But exciting times for Black women, for Black women lawyers. And again, I appreciate you joining me this morning.
Thank you so much.
All right. What an amazing guest list today. I want to thank all of my guests. All had incredible contributions to this conversation. Thanks to all of you for being a part of this conversation. We are all witnessing history. We are witnessing history. The U.S. Supreme Court has never, ever had a Black woman. This is a court that was established in the 1700s. And here we are, 2022. And it's long overdue, but just because it's long overdue doesn't mean we shouldn't celebrate it. We shouldn't recognize it for what it is. And it is an incredible moment in our history. And we have Joe Biden. We have, Representative Clyburn, Jim Clyburn of South Carolina. If you've been following this, you'll know that it was Clyburn who met with Biden, during his presidential campaign. The campaign was flailing. It wasn't even clear that Biden would get the nomination. And Clyburn said, there's some significant things that you can do. And Clyburn told Biden that appointing a Black woman to the Supreme Court was more important than even having a Black woman as vice president. He says, vice presidents come and go. Where's Al Gore? Nobody knows where he is. Vice presidents are important, but they're not nearly as important as Supreme Court justices, because Supreme Court justices serve for life. There is no expiration date. Once they are appointed, they decide when they retire, or they could even die in office, as we saw with Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg. So having someone on the court who's now 50 years old or in their 50s, literally you're talking about 30 years, if not longer, of that person being able to make decisions, interpret the law, decide some of the most critical things in our lifetimes, abortion rights, gun control, affirmative action. All of these are things that are decided at the Supreme Court level. So having a Black woman, a voice that represents, the issues of Black people is so incredibly significant. So as a Black lawyer, and as I said earlier in the show, only 2% of all lawyers in this country are Black women. So I feel incredibly honored to be a part of those 2%. I have 2 daughters in law school who are going to join the small ranks of Black women lawyers in this country. It's a great day to be a Black woman. It's a great day to be a Black lawyer. Just some words to live by before I get out. When Black women win, we all win. Think about that. I'm out, y'all. Be sure to get your booster, wear your mask, and remember, we're all in this together.